Welcome back to Chemical Safety at Work, the podcast. In today's episode, we're talking about aerosols, a type of dangerous good that is extremely common, found in most industries and workplaces. From spray paint to degreasers, aerosols are everywhere, but that doesn't mean that these little cans are without risk. To discuss this topic with me today is dangerous goods storage consultant Bethanie. Welcome to the podcast, Bethanie. Can you tell us a little bit about your role and what it involves?
Thanks, Pat. So, as consultants here at Storemasta, we work with organisations to identify the chemicals they have and really reduce that risk and improve their efficiencies around the storage and handling of those dangerous goods.
Yeah, great. So I guess you've worked with quite a few organisations looking to reduce their aerosol risk as part of that process. Can you tell us a little bit about how aerosols work and what makes them potentially dangerous?
Yeah, sure. So aerosols are generally comprised of a propellant that's stored under pressure, propels the product out of the steel or aluminium can. They aren't always the same though. So for example, foodstuffs, the propellant may be nitrous oxide or carbon dioxide. Having said that, over 90% of aerosols are made with flammable propellant. And yeah, it's really those hydrocarbons that present the risk, specifically explosion risks.
Great. And can you tell us a little bit more about those risks?
Yeah, sure thing. So three main or common risks associated with aerosol cans. So firstly, there's the flammability of the substance that's stored. Second, the actual metal canister becoming a projectile upon explosion. And then thirdly, the volatility of the aerosol can when it's exposed to sources of heat. Most aerosols are classed as 2.1 flammable gas and therefore must be treated as such.
Yep. So you mentioned that aerosols can become volatile when exposed to sources of heat just then. Can you elaborate a little bit more on the ways that they can become dangerous?
Yeah, sure thing. So most workplace incidents that occur with aerosol cans actually occur when the cans are left in the sun, in a vehicle, for example, on a work site, or when they're stored next to other ignition sources such as a working machine.
Yep.
Once they become volatile, they can actually explode in the worker's hands, and that can cause burns and shrapnel injuries.
Right. So, yeah, something to be very careful of, obviously.
Absolutely.
The way you store and handle those.
So another way they can become dangerous is when the cans are punctured or pierced. So empty cans should never be punctured or pierced, as chemical residues still present that explosion risk. Also, further, if an aerosol can is dropped or impacted, it can rapidly dispense or even explode, and that can happen quite easily. So bulk cartons can easily be knocked over by passing staff, machinery or vehicles. So something to consider there. Also, in many cases, the actual active ingredient is hazardous itself. So things like varnishes, paints, solvents, automotive sprays, they're actually hazardous substances and are capable of causing injury if the worker inhales or absorbs that substance.
Sure. So a lot to be wary of there. What are some common mistakes you see with organisations storing aerosols on site?
Yeah, sure thing. So one of the most common things we find is aerosol cans being stored in a flammable liquids cabinet with flammables. So this is really, really common because people think, okay, we have one or two cans, it's minor, we can just put them in the top shelf of that flammable liquids cabinet. This is really dangerous and non-compliant. These situations, it's important to consider the amount of aerosols. So in some cases, there's a minor storage threshold. Say if you had one, maybe two cans, they would be okay to be stored segregated away from everything else on their own.
Yeah, sure. Yep.
Any more than, say, 5, I would say they definitely need to be stored in a cage.
Yep. And these cages that are available can be quite small and easy to manage as well.
Yeah,
don't necessarily need a lot of space on site.
Yeah.
So what's the actual risk there with storing an aerosol can in a flammable liquids cabinet?
So, the main risk is the chemical compatibility.
Sure.
So if the aerosols leak or even if there is a spill, if those chemicals mix, you've got a really dangerous situation on hand.
Okay, sure. So there must be a few incidents involving aerosols that do occur each year. Are you aware of any specific incidents?
Yeah, there was one in Western Australia back in August 2022 where a worker in a cafe kitchen suffered burns when an aerosol can of cooking oil was inadvertently dropped into a deep fryer
Yikes.
of hot oil. Yeah. I think what happened is the can had been placed on a trolley next to the fryer and it fell into the deep fryer without her knowledge. And yeah, as she walked past right at the wrong moment, the can exploded and burnt her face and neck.
Ouch. Yep. So I've got a few other incidents here that our content manager Lisa has been kind enough to compile for us. In one incident, a worker was stacking cartons of aerosols full of whipped cream onto a pallet. The cartons were sealed, but while the worker was moving the boxes, one of the aerosol cans ruptured and burst through the cardboard carton. The worker was struck in the face by the can, which fractured his cheekbone and other bones around his left eye. He also suffered a damaged tear duct, detached retina, and was left with multiple lacerations to his eyelid. So back in 2010, a can of cooking oil exploded and burnt 2 kitchen workers. So the 2 cooks were working in a commercial kitchen and an aerosol can of cooking oil had been left on the cooled hot plate. When the stove was turned on, the aerosol can heated and exploded, causing a fire. Both cooks were injured and burnt by the explosion and subsequent oil fire, and the staff members were rushed to hospital for burn treatment and therapy and the required surgeries. In another incident, a paving machine operator was finishing an asphalt driveway. A can of spray paint used for marking the driveway had been left on the screed of the paving machine, which gets very hot. And after about 30 minutes of operations, the aerosol can of paint overheated and exploded, igniting the clothing of the machinery operator, and he suffered 2nd and 3rd degree burns to his legs. In an incident at a mining site, a worker was using an acetylene and oxygen torch to cut a mounting hull. He had used an aerosol paint can to mark the location of the hull and laid the spray can at his feet while he was using the cutting torch. During the process, a piece of molten metal fell onto the can, which ruptured and then ignited the paint inside. The worker was sprayed with burning paint and received 2nd degree burns to his arms and hands, neck and shoulders, as well as his face. So here's one that actually went to court. In Queensland last year, a company pleaded guilty and was ordered to pay $40,000 after exploding aerosol cans caused a metal bar to strike and injure a worker on a piling rig at a solar farm. The defendant was subcontracted by the principal contractor of the solar farm to provide piling services and failed to eliminate or minimise the risk of the 12 galvanised aerosol cans exploding. The 4.7 kilogram bar was propelled into the worker when the aerosol cans exploded while they were stored inside a toolbox on the rig. The magistrate found the defendant should have known about the explosion risk. The defendant had a safety data sheet for the aerosol cans which noted they were hazardous, contained flammable aerosol, and were pressurised, and may burst if heated. The defendant also had a manual for the piling rig which warned that some surfaces of the piling rig, including the engine, could overheat. Okay, so what can be done to improve aerosol safety?
Yeah, so there's plenty that can be done. Probably 4 key things that I'll point out is always check the safety data sheet of the aerosol as well as the manufacturer's instructions to make sure you understand the hazards of that aerosol. Secondly, train staff to ensure they're aware of handling practices and what's safe so that the cans aren't damaged, punctured, pierced or placed near heat sources or ignition sources. Thirdly is PPE, so that's critical for worker safety, and make sure they're used in a well-ventilated area that's free from hazards. Lastly, so a dedicated storage cage that offers projectile protection, ample ventilation, security to deter unauthorised access, and segregation from incompatible sources.
Yeah, sure.
Signage is also critical with that as well.
Yep. Those staff know exactly what they're looking at, what they're dealing with when looking to use an aerosol on site.
Yep.
So what are the products that Storemasta has available for these compliant storage requirements?
Yeah, so Storemasta has a full aerosol cage range that ranges from storage of 18 through to 625 cans.
Yep.
So quite a range there, various sizes and storage capacities in between. On the PPE side, we offer the actual PPE storage cabinet to ensure that it's all in one place and easily accessible for staff.
Sure. So who might use a 625 can aerosol cage, for example?
Yeah, absolutely. So places like a mining or even paint workshops where ventilation is really critical and they store a large quantity of aerosols.
So big business, big operations usually might offer something like that. And then down through to your smallest size, your 18 can cage, who might that be appropriate for?
Yeah, so an 18 can cage we often find, say, for schools where they have, say, an art facility, smaller operations like that where safety is obviously critical, but the volume is much lower.
Yep, sure. There's a whole range of sizes in between those, obviously.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we hope this discussion has helped you understand the hazards associated with aerosols and what you can do about it in your own workplace. Shifting gears in the next episode, we're taking a deep dive into Storemasta and our journey through over 3 decades of developing dangerous goods storage and handling products to mitigate risks like aerosols and other dangerous goods. So we have Storemasta CEO Caleb Urquhart joining us to discuss that next episode. So tune in and we look forward to talking to you then. Cheers.